I'm going to talk about the mental health conditions that we have been correcting not only in our own family, but also in tens of thousands of other families across the world. And talk also about how we got into the thyroid area as well, and how that is interrelated to mental well-being, and how when your thyroid isn't working, you don't really feel that good about life. So I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about my own personal story, for those of you who don't know of me. There may be some trigger points here as we go throughout this, and that you'll recognize maybe who I am or who you thought I was from national news. And so I'll be talking about that and how that plays into the story as well. And then I'll be talking about, first and foremost, the root of the problem as to why we're seeing a tremendous rise, an alarming rise in all disease, and how we can put a stop to that and correct it and rise up, regardless of whether we have a mental health condition or a thyroid condition, how when we nourish our body and our brains, we see life differently. We feel differently. We see everybody around us differently. And we just feel so much better about life. We have a greater determination, a greater motivation to do good. And so I'll be talking about that. So going right into it, I love this quote. Though I never heard it myself, it comes from over 2,400 years ago, from Hippocrates. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. And how true is that? That's what we're supposed to be thriving off of, is the food, what we take in. And our bodies are supposed to feel great from it, because it's supposed to deliver all of the various nutrients that we need, as long as we're eating a balanced diet. So we run into two issues here, because we're not using food as our medicine. And so what is wrong with our medicine that we have such an issue with disease and people just feeling less than ideal? Well, when we talk about it, we like to focus on the mental health aspect, because we know it well. And we've worked with over 100,000 people over the past 2 decades in taking them off of these medications, and we've seen firsthand the negative effects that they can have. And so when we're talking about psychiatric medications, in general terms, what's wrong with our medicine is that they don't work. You see, this paper comes from the late 2000s, and it analyzed over 20 different studies from the drug manufacturers and then a number of other research papers. A total of 30 different sources were used to identify the evidence as to what SSRI medications were actually doing in people. You see, these medications came out in the late 1980s, and they were supposed to be the blockbuster medications for depression. They're supposed to eradicate it. That's what we were being told. But they never delivered. And now that we look at the data today, we see it as the complete opposite. Because only 11 to 30% of the people that take these medications will see a small benefit over that of placebo. And yet, 75% of those people taking the medications will experience the adverse negative side effects. The adverse negative side effects like insomnia, weight gain, greater depression and anxiety, cloudy or a foggy head where they're not able to focus and know what they're supposed to be doing in a day, they get flustered really easy. Involuntary abortions, as it specifies, in real terms, we call that miscarriages. And then the worst things of all, the very things that they should be helping to prevent, increased risk of suicide by anywhere from 2 to 8 times, and increased risk of homicide. Almost every schoolyard shooting over the past few decades has one common thread besides a gun. And it's that one of these medications was involved, causing these young men to do things that they would have never otherwise had done. And so you see that question there, more risks than benefits. By the time you're done reading this paper and many, many other papers that are coming out on these medications, you come to realize it's not a question. It's a statement. It's the truth that they have more risks, far more risks than they do benefits. For some people, fortunately for them, they've only seen the benefits. For some people, it's been great. For others, though, it's been devastating. When we're talking about ADHD and ADD, talking about the stimulants, the methylphenidates and the amphetamines that these young children are taking, the studies are now showing that there's really no long-term benefit. There isn't even really a short-term benefit. There's a lot of devastating effects. But in this particular study, what they showed is that those who continue to take these medications into their teenage years versus those who stop taking them, that there was one, no benefit to symptom management, and two, it impaired their growth. On average, they were an inch shorter than their counterparts who had stopped taking those medications while in their childhood years. So it's having this negative impact on the entire body. So what's wrong with our medicine? It's that it's synthetic and that we weren't made for it, that our body doesn't know how to handle it. And so of course we're going to see these devastating effects. It's not food. It's not what was put into nature with us for us to thrive. So then the second question is, what's wrong with our food, that it's not acting as our medicine? Well, when you take a look at the farming methods that have taken place over the past century and a bit, you see the model that's been applied of quantity over quality, where for far too long they've drawn way too much out of the soil and not put it back. They generally fertilize with potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. That's all they're putting back. Who here buys sea salt? Who here has ever looked at the package and seen 50, 60, 70 plus trace minerals as one of the features that's listed on that package? Yeah, okay, that's one of the reasons that you buy it. You're not just getting sodium chloride, but you're getting all these other trace minerals, which is a beautiful thing. That's what's being pulled out of the soil on a yearly basis, and it's not being replenished. And so what science has shown is that over the past century and a bit, that there's been a depletion in the mineral content by over 50%. So the plants have no access to many of these minerals. And so you would suspect the food coming out would be depleted by 50%. But it gets worse than that. You see, before we jump into where we've gone with the modernization of agriculture, this issue was even identified in 1936 because of the rise of disease that was happening in the US because of the farming methods, and it actually became a Senate hearing on the matter as to how do we prevent all of this disease from happening by making sure people have the proper nourishment. And so you can actually find that Senate document called Senate Document 264 from 1936 showing the discussion that they were having in identifying why all this disease was happening. Now, do you think that they fixed the problem from 1936? No. Here's a quote here. 99% of American people are deficient in minerals, and a marked deficiency in any one of the more important minerals actually results in disease. So if you just remove one key mineral, you will have disease. And the reason why is because your body cannot make up for that. It can't synthesize a mineral. If you remove iodine, it doesn't matter what else you take, you will not be producing adequate levels of T3 and T4 hormones, because the 3 and the 4 in that hormone, the T3 and the T4, that stands for the amount of atoms of iodine within that hormone. So you remove that, you don't get T3, you don't get T4 hormones, you don't get a proper metabolism, because T3 is necessary for the regulation of the metabolic rate of every single cell in the body. So that's just one. If you remove calcium, obviously we know what's going to happen, right? Remove magnesium, you just start picking each one of those out, and it's kind of like when you're playing Jenga and you got that tower of blocks, and it's to the point where, you know, any one of them you pull, the rest comes down. That's the way that these crucial minerals are. You pull it out, everything else falls apart because they're all interdependent on each other. So they didn't fix the problem from 1936. And then we take a look at what's happening within farming. And in the British Food Journal in 1997, Dr. Anne-Marie Meyer and her team published this article wherein they identify 20 common fruits and vegetables that they did samples on, identifying the level of minerals in them from 1947, comparing it to samples of those same 20 common fruits and vegetables in 1997. And what they found is that many of those common fruits and vegetables were lacking by over 80% in many of the key nutrients, many of those key minerals. So the problem was already bad in 1947 from where they got the samples from, because in 1936 they already saw a rise in disease because of the nutrient deficiencies. And in 1997 it just gets that much worse. And they haven't rectified the problem. All they've attempted to do is apply a Band-Aid solution to manage the symptoms of these diseases that are arising because of nutrient deficiencies. That's really all they are, is nutrient deficiency disorders. We're starving for nutrition, even though we have this overabundance of food. What her and her team concluded was that it was due to the modernization of agriculture, wherein they began to employ the use of these synthetic herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and it was preventing the proper uptake of these nutrients. Even though they're depleted in the soil, it was preventing what little was there from being uptaken into the plants. Who here has heard of glyphosate? All right, who here has heard of Roundup? Okay, Roundup, farmer's best friend. Glyphosate's one of the active ingredients in Roundup. It's absolutely horrible. Not only does it kill plants, not only does it kill bacteria, because its first patent was actually as an antibiotic, but it kills you. In fact, there was just a settlement or a court case wherein Monsanto / Bayer, they're one and the same now, was just sued for over $280 million because of an individual being exposed to glyphosate becoming terminally ill with cancer. And that case was just won in the US about within the last month. And now General Mills is being sued because glyphosate's being found within their cereals like Cheerios and whatnot. And so we're getting just this toxic ingredient that kills everything in agriculture other than the genetically modified organisms that are produced to withstand it. So, how this herbicide would prevent the proper uptake of nutrition. We understand the importance of bacteria within our gut, right? And that without the proper balance of your gut flora, you're not going to be digesting and uptaking nutrients properly, right? What if I told you that bacteria culture within the soil was equally as important for the facilitation of the breakdown of minerals to be uptaken by plants? What if I told you that if you just went and dumped a bunch of rock-formed mineral onto the soil, that it won't really do a whole lot until that soil, the life in it, has the ability to break it down and process it and convert it to an organic form so that those plants can readily uptake it? Well, the same thing applies to us, obviously, that we don't absorb rock-formed mineral. It needs to be in the proper form, has to be in an organic form, just like the plants won't uptake it. So you end up with the die-off of these bacteria cultures that facilitate that conversion when you spray with Roundup, acting as an antibiotic, sterilizes the soil, offsets the balance of life to the point where you end up with the die-off of the worms as well, that aren't just there to aerate the soil, but many worms have a gizzard, similar to a chicken, but just much tinier. And what they do is they actually grind up that soil. They grind up the minerals, and we know within nutrition that when you reduce the particle size, you increase the absorption. So the same thing applies in the soil. And so you end up with this inert substance when you spray it with these toxic agents that no longer facilitates a breakdown and uptake of these minerals to the plants. And that's why we see a major reduction in the mineral content that exceeds the fact that there's just a 50% reduction in the mineral content in the soils. The little that's there is not available to the plants. So what effect does this have on the body? If we take a look at every single system in the body, every single organ, every single system, every single cell in the body requires adequate amounts of nutrients to be able to even function. So if we take a look at the skeletal structure, obviously we would understand that if you don't have adequate levels of calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, boron, vitamin K2, vitamin D, you're going to end up with a condition called osteoporosis. Now, if we're talking about the thyroid, we understand if you don't have adequate levels of iodine, there's not going to be proper function, but that's a little bit myopic because we also got to expand it out and say, okay, you also need magnesium and selenium and vitamin C and vitamin B2 and B3 to optimize the iodine pathway so it actually works effectively, so the iodine can actually do its job, right? They're interdependent. They are a team. If we're talking about heart health or cardiovascular health, many people are taking beautiful omega fatty acids to help empower the cardiovascular system. Many people are relying on vegetable sources like chia, hemp, flax, camelina. And that comes in the form of ALA. But it's the EPA form of omega-3 fatty acid that empowers the cardiovascular system. And your body's supposed to convert ALA to EPA and DHA. And if you don't have adequate levels of magnesium, zinc, vitamin B3, and B6, you're not going to convert that ALA into the DHA, which is good for cognition, and the EPA, which is good for heart health and the whole cardiovascular system. So there's a breakdown there. Everything is working as a team. So when you start to lack minerals, everything else isn't able to do its job to its fullest, and you have a breakdown in your system. And your body actually is really intelligent, and it begins to rob from other sources. And your bones are the main store of minerals. And that's why many times when people are suffering for really long with different health issues, they eventually end up with osteoporosis because their body's just been constantly drawing from it to help keep other systems running. So the whole body is taxed. Talking about mental health. When we first started doing this in 1996, we had a lot of doctors and stuff just saying, you guys are out to lunch. Minerals have no effect in mental health whatsoever. And the reason why they were saying that is because the science hadn't yet identified how minerals were playing a role in mental health. In 1996, the Japanese began to map out the neurotransmitter pathways as part of the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genes and Genomes, the KEG project. And what came out of it was this very sciencey looking document that kind of illustrates what's going on. Who here has heard of serotonin? Okay, who here understands that that plays a little bit of a role within our moods? Okay, who here has heard of melatonin? Okay, some of us have probably even taken it. Who understands that that plays a role in our sleep cycles? Okay, how about dopamine? Okay, if you don't have adequate levels of dopamine, you're not going to feel that good about life. You're going to try finding fixes in all sorts of places, whether it be at the bottom of a bottle, whether it be toking, whether it be gambling, or whatever addictive activity you decide to jump into to try to get that fix on a regular basis. So we're going to talk about that just briefly. If we're talking about serotonin, that's part of the tyrosine pathway, which is an essential amino acid found in many of your proteins. But tyrosine doesn't just magically convert into 5-hydroxytryptophan and then into serotonin, and then to acetylserotonin, and then to melatonin. There's an enzyme reaction that takes place in between. And I go into this just briefly just to illustrate that minerals and vitamins play an absolute key role. If we zoom in between the conversion from tryptophan to 5-hydroxytryptophan that many people are trying to skip when they're depressed, they're just buying the 5-hydroxytryptophan, versus asking the question, why am I not producing adequate levels of 5-hydroxytryptophan that converts into serotonin? What you see there is an enzyme reaction that takes place that consists of iron, methyl tetrahydrofolate, so your methylated folic acid, well, folic acid that would be methylated. And then you've got vitamin C and D and then B3. If you're lacking any one of those, that enzyme reaction doesn't take place. You don't end up with the conversion of tryptophan to 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then let's just say that you do convert to 5-hydroxytryptophan, but you're lacking adequate levels of vitamin B6 in its activated form, which is P5P. You're not converting 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin. So do you kind of get the point there? That just because you have some of the ingredients doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do anything with it. So if we go over to the tyrosine pathway, we see the same thing. Same 5 ingredients going down to L-DOPA, which goes down to dopamine once again. It's actually pretty similar in nature. You see the 5 ingredients there, and then you see the activated form of B6. And then if you go down to dopamine into norepinephrine, so now we're talking about endocrine system health, making sure the adrenals are working properly, because norepinephrine converts into epinephrine. You see SAMe and cortisol there, necessary to convert that. Those are produced through similar type pathways, but you see now copper introduced to the mix there. And when you chase these down, if you were to chase down all the different methylation pathways, if you were to chase down all the various neurotransmitter pathways, if you were to chase down how hormones are produced in the similar type pathways, what you're going to find is enzyme reactions that facilitate the conversion that always require different vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. And so you need to take a holistic approach in order to facilitate the body going back into a state of thriving versus surviving. All right, so now to get out of this document, and that Dragonfly really wants to know what we're talking about as well, I guess. All right, thank you for your attendance. So what role does Truehope play in this? How do we get involved in this? See, I'd mentioned that my family was suffering with severe mental health conditions ourselves. And so we had a particular interest in being able to solve these issues. And so we've been doing this since 1996, and we've helped over 100,000 people at this point. Actually, I think it's over 200,000 people now that we've either helped through the retailers, because it's available at health food stores, or we've helped directly where people will phone us and we set up a file for them, and we've got the largest mental health database of its kind in the world that actually was the topic of one particular study from a university researcher, because we had the greatest set of data on so many people to identify the different trends that sleep, nutrition, and just general life had on one's mental well-being. And so 1996 is when we officially started, but really the story starts in 1953. It starts when my mother was born into this middle-class Italian family that looked pretty normal on the outside. But within the house, there was a lot of volatility, a lot of abuse, a lot of anger because of the mental illness that they were plagued with. And so my mother, growing up in this situation, decided to move out early And she did, and developed a phenomenal love for life, even though she came out of this less than ideal situation. And she met a young man, and at the age of 17 got married to my 18-year-old father. And one thing led to another. I don't think they ever really figured out really what was going on, but there was 9 of us running around soon enough. Just a demonstration of her love for life. Just a beautiful woman, absolutely. And in fact, when she wasn't tending to our needs, she was always reaching out and trying to help somebody else. And at one point, she was working within the foster care system, helping troubled teens. Fell in love with this young woman who didn't really have a family, came from a real broken situation, came home and convinced my father to adopt her, making for a total of 10 children. And so, unfortunately though, even though she was starting this new life, she inherited the bipolar disorder, the mental illness that her father would have had, that ultimately led to him taking his own life 5 years before I was born. And so she developed this shortly after. It got really bad shortly after having me, and I'm number 7. I'm right there in the white shirt, black suspenders, black bow tie. And after 10 years of this roller coaster of bipolar with rapid cycling, some days not getting out of bed because of how depressed she was, to some days not going to bed until 4 in the morning because of how manic she was, and she had so much to do, so many projects on the go. After 10 years of this, she finally decided in January of 1994 to go to the doctor and receive help. So she went to the doctor. She received a prescription of Prozac, one of those SSRI medications, to help with the bipolar disorder with rapid cycling. And unfortunately, 2 weeks into taking that medication, she ended up taking her own life, leaving the legacy to 9 children of mental illness and leaving everybody in a devastated state. It was like a bomb had gone off in our house. And it's an extremely hard thing to heal from that when we weren't well ourselves, when there was a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of depression, a lot of mania, all that type of stuff, a lot of OCD behaviors. And so there was 2 of my siblings that had it extremely bad, Joseph and Autumn. Joseph was 15 years old, the brother just older than me. He was homicidal, suicidal, stockpiling weapons, and when he wasn't, and he was actually on weapons charges with the RCMP. My sister, he was basically the next schoolyard shooting waiting to happen. My sister Autumn was on a cocktail of 5 medications. At best, she was sedated. When she wasn't in the psych ward, she had to be on 24-hour supervision because she would obsess about killing herself and her 3-year-old son, thinking that that was appropriate. And so my father is left in this extreme predicament where he's literally watching his family go down the same road. His children are going down the same road that their mother and their grandfather went down. And he was already devastated enough about the loss of his wife of 22 years. And so he couldn't bear to have another suicide in the home. And so he began to exhaust all the resources that were available to him, began to meet with specialists versus just working with a family doctor. He met at one point with the head psychiatrist of the Foothills Hospital in Calgary, Alberta, in early 1995. And he was just given the information that, look, you have the best of medications available to you. This is as good as going to get. Yeah, Joe won't really have a quality of life. He'll never be able to have, maybe a family or children or anything like that without it, resulting in destruction, because he couldn't even maintain a friendship during this time because of how volatile he was. And she just said, she laid it out straight to him when he kept on poking and prodding. She just said, look, you need to face the reality that someday you may have to plan more funerals. And it was in that moment that he realized that the medications offered no hope for our family, and he began to turn elsewhere within the community, asking people what they knew about mental illness. And he heard a lot of different things, a lot of different stories that were kept in the closet because people were so embarrassed to bring it out. There was so much stigma around mental illness. But never once did he hear a story of recovery. But a lot of people had various things to recommend. Good things like Tahitian noni juice and magnetic therapy and what Joe still refers to as rust water. There was all sorts of stuff my father was willing to try. He was willing to try anything because the medications weren't really working. They were taking the edge off the disorder, but they weren't working for Joe. They weren't giving him a quality of life. And so he was trying everything under the sun that was being made available to him, and it wasn't working. And so finally by mid-1995, he just came to the conclusion that there was no known answer for mental illness. And that if there was an answer, and if there truly is a God, because he's a believer in God, he said if there truly is a God, a Father in heaven who cares about us, he wouldn't want us to suffer like this, and he would know the answer. So he began to spend a considerable amount of time in fasting and prayer and meditation, seeking for some kind of divine inspiration that would lead him in the right direction, that would provide a restoration to his family. Nothing miraculous happened overnight. But as he persistently did this over the next few months, he was given bits and pieces of information regarding nutrition. Somebody gave him a set of tapes called Dead Doctors Don't Lie, and it was in regard to mineral supplementation. And I remember being a young boy traveling down the road with him, and he's listening to these tapes. Kind of a traumatizing thing for a young boy to be subjected to having to listen to that. I'm sure I still glean on that information without even realizing it, though, to this day, though. But he was given these bits and pieces of information that ultimately primed him for what he was going to hear in November of 1995 when he's walking down the hallway one day with his colleague talking about replacing the carpets, because he was a property manager over 26 large buildings in southern Alberta, and he's overcome with this impression. I need to tell my colleague about what's going on at home. As unprofessional as it is, he went with that feeling. And he told his colleague, David Hardy, about what was going on. And his colleague had something interesting to say. He said, you know, Tony, I've got a large family like yours. Actually, it was a little bit bigger. Something in the water down there, I guess. He says, but they're all well. They're fine. They're healthy. My wife, she's fine. I've never dealt with mental illness personally, so I can't relate to you. He says, however, I spent over 20 years in the animal feed industry formulating feed for hogs across Western Canada and the Western United States. We saw something commonplace in the hog pens called ear and tail biting syndrome, where these hogs would become irritable with each other. They'd bite chunks of their ears and tails off each other, and if you didn't pen them away from each other, they'd actually kill each other. Sound familiar? Extreme mental illness. If they were a human, they'd be admitted to the psych ward and given a large dose of antipsychotics. And so, he says we learned within agriculture that you could completely eradicate that disorder simply by putting the proper nutrition into their feed. And even though my father had already tried so many things up to that point and nothing had delivered, in that moment, he says, like a light bulb flipped on. He knew it was the answer. He had a spiritual confirmation. They went down to a health food store. They picked up all these different vitamin and mineral supplements for Joe. They put them onto them in November of 1995, and it failed. It didn't work. The effects were marginal. So they continued on with it. They tried more and more, and it kept on failing. But fortunately, my father had that spiritual confirmation, and so they persisted with it. And finally, by January 18th of 1996, a few months down the road, they came across 4 different products that did work, consisting of a colloidal mineral supplement, a calcium magnesium phosphorus supplement, a multivitamin, and grapeseed extract. Within 5 days of Joseph being on these supplements, he says like a fog lifted. He could now see what was right and wrong. So here he had been engaging in all these destructive behaviors, these destructive actions, and he never recognized the effect that it was having on people around him, that those weren't good things to engage in. And now he could see that. Within 30 days, he would have no longer been diagnosed with bipolar disorder because he was operating in the normal range. Normal good days, normal bad days, but not the extremes anymore. And so my father was like, wow, this is incredible. We need to get Autumn onto them. He phones her up, and she wasn't willing. She said, Dad, my psychiatrist said if I rock the boat, if I play around with my medications, I'll die. So she wasn't willing to try them. But having to be on 24-hour supervision, and her husband happened to work a full week night shift at a factory and nobody available to look after her, her husband had to drive her the 5 hours south from Edmonton down to southern Alberta, drop her off with us, and a day and a half into her stay, she had a severe panic attack, went suicidal, and my dad just said, look, we're not doing this. I'm not babysitting you. This worked for Joe, it's going to work for you. She got onto the supplements, not really willingly. Her husband was absolutely livid, and it's a real good thing there's a 5-hour drive between him and my father because it would have been a lot more than words, I'm sure. But when he came down 5 days later to pick her up and saw his wife becoming a new person, becoming the woman that she could be, even though she wasn't even close to being well, but being that the delusions that she had gone down with were gone, being that she was now taking care of her own hygiene, that she was taking care of our 3-year-old son, that she was able to conversate logically and rationally, that was a huge contrast. And so they continued on with it. Within 45 days, they had her off of all of her medications, which we discovered were extremely addictive. And we discovered that if you didn't reduce the medications quick enough, that you'd actually become over-medicated when you nutrate, and you at first feel good, but then you feel worse because now you're experiencing the negative side effects of those medications. And so she got off those medications, even with all the withdrawals, and she thought she was 100% better. She wasn't, just like Joseph wasn't 100% better by 30 days, but the majority of that healing took place within that month to month and a half. And as time went on, they just got more and more stable, more healthy, and they developed better coping mechanisms, knowing how to deal with stress, right? So a lot of the behavioral issues that they had adopted over the years, they were able to start getting rid of because they recognized that they weren't healthy. So it really facilitated this major transformation in them to become different people, better people, healthier people. Now that should have been the end of the story. My father's prayers had been answered. His family was receiving the restoration that he had so desperately pleaded for. Everybody was beginning to see Joseph and Autumn in a new light, including her husband. Could you imagine being a husband, but actually more of a parent to two children? Just one that's, 2 years younger than you, and then one that's 20 years younger than you? He was a care provider for both his wife and his son. So now he had to change the dynamics of that relationship, and that took a little bit. There was a bit of adjustment. At one point, he came home and was absolutely in a panic shortly after she got on the nutrients. Because she was gone and his 3-year-old son's gone, and he's thinking, oh my goodness, where is she? And this is before the days of cell phones, right? Everybody having them. She comes back half an hour, 45 minutes later, opens up the trunk, starts pulling out groceries. He's like, where were you? What are you doing? What? I went grocery shopping, right? She was filling that role of being able to do what she needed to do as being a mom, being, taking care of things around the house, doing what she wanted to do. But there was a major adjustment that had to take place there for him. So that should have been the end of the story because everything seemed fine. My dad had a great job. But growing up in a community of 3,500 people and almost everybody knowing who Joseph was and the kind of trouble that he was, they saw the transformation that took place in him. They began to ask questions to my dad saying, what have you done with him? Completely different person. He's sociable, happy, kind. Just his very energy about him is different. The way he carries himself. And my father would tell them. And I do think it'd work for my son with ADD or ADHD or my wife with depression or now the principal's phoning, not with bad calls about Joseph being another incident, but hey, we got this other troubled teenager in here. Do you think that what you did for Joseph could work for him as well? And so it started to spread like wildfire throughout the community, became extremely controversial because the doctors weren't being taught anything about nutrition and the effects that it has on mental health. So there was a major pushback from it. But my father took a look at it as it began to spread and said, wow, think of all the families that could be blessed like my family's been blessed. Think of all the lives that could be restored. We need to get this into the hands of doctors. And so in his naivety, thinking that it would just be readily accepted, remember this is back in 1996, everybody saw things a little bit differently back then and thought that, the medical system was completely, for just having the most efficacious products, when in reality all we're seeing is that it's just pharmaceutical based, right? And so my father attempted to get it into the medical system because it was working. So he went and approached Dr. Brian Kolb, a world-renowned neuroscientist out of Lethbridge, Alberta. And the reason why he's world-renowned is he actually discovered that brain cell regeneration can take place. So, with brain damage, if you got it, the saying is the damage is done, meaning there's nothing you can do about it. He disproved that, ironically using 22 vitamins and minerals. He showed that when they would induce an injury into a rat brain by either removing a portion or punching holes in it, that there would actually be some regrowth, which was really quite fantastic because before that, nobody knew anything about brain cells actually regenerating. And so my father approached him and said, hey, this is what we're finding. Do you think you could study it? He said, no, I don't do those kinds of studies, but Dr. Bonnie Kaplan out of the University of Calgary does. And so my father attempted to get in touch with her, and she just wasn't willing to give him the time of day. She says that she had dealt with all the flakes in the 80s regarding nutrition and just didn't have the time to waste. So my father went back to Brian Kolb. Brian Kolb gave him the symptom evaluation forms to hand out to those that would be using the products. And they were sent right back to Brian Kolb, so he got to see the numbers. He got back in touch with my father in a short period of time and said, we got some really significant numbers here. I'm going to forward them on to Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. She took a look at it and said, this is either complete snake oil, and there's fraud going on here because these numbers are so fantastic, or we are onto a potential medical breakthrough. So she sat down with my father and his colleague and with Autumn and interviewed them all to find out what's going on and identified that Autumn was not who she was supposed to be on Black and White, being an individual that was in intense need of psychiatric care. She was able to articulate well. She was very healthy. She just seemed really well. And so she decided to study it on 12 bipolar patients. She put them on the 4 different products. She saw the results in very short order, just like we had, got excited about it. But halfway throughout the study, everybody began to crash. their symptoms began to return. And it wasn't just within the study, it was also at home and within the community abroad. And the University of Calgary did an analysis on the different products and found that the colloidal mineral supplement that we were using varied in the levels of minerals depending upon the batch. So going back to that quote from the Senate document 264, deficient in just one of the major ones will result in disease. So all of a sudden, now we've got a deficiency in a few of the key minerals. We're not getting them in adequate levels. Everybody's symptoms began to return. So my father was left looking for a replacement. The study was shut down, and a lot of things were tried. Nothing really delivered. And so finally, my father came to the conclusion that he had to develop his own all-in-one supplement. And so a great deal of research and prayer, seeking for inspiration, because there was a lot of vitamin mineral products out in the market, but they weren't doing anything in regard to mental health. And that's what they should be doing. They should be nourishing the body and the brain. And if they're not doing their job. And so my father didn't just want to throw out another product, because that's not what it was about. He wanted to provide a solution to these devastating issues that were plaguing humanity. And so what came out of it was Empower Plus, a very whole multivitamin, really is all it is, that is able to help lift everybody up. Regardless of mental health diagnosis, you nourish the body and brain, you just feel better about life, even if you're already healthy. You're able to deal with stresses better. Everything just works better. 36 ingredients consisting of 16 minerals in the proper balance. That's one of the key things. If you do not provide the minerals in a proper balance, it's ideal for human nutrition, you can actually do a lot more harm than you do good. So that's key number one. But you can balance rock form minerals all day, and it won't make a difference to you unless you can actually absorb it. And that's the next thing. Just like the plants don't absorb these rock form minerals that are in the soil because they're basically inert, they got to be in an organic form. They got to be bound to an organic molecule. So the 16 minerals in the proper balance being bound to an organic molecule, so the body could actually recognize them as nutrition to pull them up across the intestinal wall, across cell membranes, and ultimately across the blood-brain barrier so that the nutrients can get where they need to go to actually promote that healing. So that was key number one, the minerals being in that proper balance. And that's the main key that sets it apart. And then adding 14 vitamins, 3 amino acids, and 3 antioxidants to the mix to help facilitate the assimilation of many of those minerals. It was changing lives. It was beautiful. It came out and it worked. However, even though it's changing lives, what we came to recognize is people that were in a severe situation that had to take a double dose, or a loading dose as we call it, didn't like the fact that they had to take up to 48 capsules per day in 1998 when it was introduced. So you see 24 there, they had to double that to correct the situation, and then they could come down to that maintenance dose, and that was far too much. Even though they were saving on their grocery bill because, well, basically that's a meal in itself, 48 capsules per day, they didn't like doing that. But they liked the results, so people were taking it. And in today's standards, if we were to introduce this now 20 years later, it would still be a high-quality multivitamin hitting the health food store shelves, being that it's a broad-spectrum micronutrient that is chelated, and yet you had to take up to 48 capsules per day. And this is part of the reason why mineral supplementation has gone overlooked, because we haven't been providing it in the supplement industry in the proper form for it to actually create those incredible results to show how powerful minerals are when you correct those deficiencies. So 48 per day. So what we did is we changed the chelation technology in 2000, got it down to 32 per day of the same formula, still too much. So then what we started doing was what the worms would have been doing in the soil if they weren't killed off. And we started grinding up the minerals into nano-sized particles, and we got it down to 18 capsules per day. Same formula, same results, but now we're talking less than half. But then in 2005, we developed our own chelation technology, and we got down to 15 capsules per day at a loading dose, or a maintenance dose of 7 to 8. And then we've just continued to work at it, and we're still working at it to this day, trying to improve it so that you can take less of it and yet still see the same results. So today, 2013, we further improved it, got it down to 8 to 12 capsules per day, or 4 to 6 as a maintenance dose, providing the same results that you would have seen 20 years ago taking 48 capsules per day, 1/4 the amount. Why? Why the improvements? Because we mimicked what Mother Nature was doing, and Mother Nature knows best. What Mother Nature was doing under ideal conditions before we went and tampered with her by spraying all this toxic garbage on the soils that has destroyed Mother Nature's ability to facilitate the conversion of these minerals to nourish the plants, which would then nourish us. So it was produced, it was brought back to Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. She was excited to study it because she saw those initial results on the 12 bipolar patients with the 4 other products. So what she did, she took 10 bipolar patients, put them on it, saw tremendous results very, very quickly, got so excited about it that she actually published the preliminary results, and it went big. Now this is October of 2000, so there was no social media. If there was, it would have went viral. But it ended up on national news, and I'll actually show you that news clip here.
Tonight on CTV News, can a nutritional supplement help people suffering with a troubling mental disorder? CTV's Avis Favreau has an exclusive report you won't want to miss. Watch CTV News tonight at 11.
In medical news tonight, there is new reason for optimism for sufferers of bipolar disorder, a condition that causes manic depression and a condition that affects hundreds of thousands of Canadians. According to findings of a small study presented today to the Canadian Psychiatric Association, a combination of vitamins and minerals may alleviate the disorder's debilitating symptoms. CTV's medical specialist Avis Favreau reports.
Bipolar illness ran through Tony Stephan's family. His wife Debbie committed suicide. His son and daughter were also ill and on drugs that didn't work.
She had already been taking medication for over 4.5 years, and she was going to suicide. It wasn't helping. My son was on 900 milligrams of lithium per day and was absolutely out of control.
Then he learned of minerals and vitamins given to pigs with a nervous disorder. In desperation, he gave a variation of the supplements to his son.
Within 30 days, he no longer experienced any of the symptoms of bipolar affective disorder.
Both his children, he says, are still on the supplements and are well some 4 years later. Now, doctors at the University of Calgary say they have intriguing early results from a group of 10 bipolar patients on the same supplements. Most had less depression, fewer manic episodes, and improved mental well-being.
The decrease in their symptoms is of a magnitude that is very impressive. Any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention.
And most have cut their standard drug use by 2/3.
This is an entirely different approach to the standard medical therapies that we use now.
But Steve Morton, who was part of the Calgary study, says the nutrients helped put his life in order after the bipolar illness left him suicidal and in hospital.
This has brought me to recognize a new me, and has allowed me to become, a new person.
In fact, the Alberta government is investing more than $500,000 to fund more rigorous studies of these supplements.
The Alberta government actually funded $544,000 into a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial to further substantiate the effects that these supplements were having. And the reason why they were doing that was not just because it was helping people live normal lives. It was going to save them in healthcare costs right off the bat because it was far less expensive than your psychiatric medications, and it was also going to bring in tax revenue as these people began to live normal lives rather than just being in and out of the psych wards or sedated on disability. They were going to be able to go back to work and do what they wanted to do. And so the Alberta government recognized that, and so they're willing to fund over $500,000 into further studies. And so right after this news clip aired, our phones were ringing off the hook because it's like Dr. Bonnie Kaplan said, any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention. The reason why she was saying that is what her preliminary results were showing is that it was over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. Over 3 times more effective. Absolutely phenomenal. They'd never seen anything like that. They'd seen something close with the use of lithium that was getting, kind of up there, but not quite. But lithium, being a mineral just administered at toxic levels, that was really what many of these researchers and doctors' drug of choice was in regard to the treatment of depression. So it caught a lot of people's attention. Our phones were ringing off the hook. But the very next day after that news clip aired, we made some new friends that stuck around for a very long time. Health Canada phoned up and notified my father that he was in contravention of Section 3132 of the Food and Drugs Act, and in order to help somebody with bipolar disorder within Canada, you need a drug identification number, regardless of the fact that it was a multivitamin that was doing it. And so they came in, they said, you're not going to be able to do this. They shut down the study that they had initially approved, but once they saw that there was actually effects to it, they decided to shut it down. And so that double-blind placebo-controlled trial was put to a halt, and my father was left trying to work with Health Canada, wherein he realized that they just had a very strong agenda to prevent Canadians having access to the EMP formulation. At one point they said, you know, Mr. Stephan, if you want to do what you're doing here, perhaps you just want to move south of the border, as if Canadians aren't deserving of a Canadian discovery that could largely improve their lives. So my father at that point just said, you know what, I don't need the permission of some bureaucrat in Ottawa to bless the lives of families like I've been blessed, like my family's been blessed. So he just outright ignored them. He just dug in his heels, completely ignored them, and finally in 2003 came to a climax when they raided our head office with an RCMP SWAT team, performing basically a drug bust, trying to scare us away. They shut it off at the border, putting 3,000 Canadians in harm's way. They were warned about it. They actually knew about it before they even did the raid. They knew that their actions would put Canadians in harm's way, so they set up a 1-800 crisis line to take all the calls as if that was going to solve the problem. Unfortunately, suicides resulted that they were warned about by the head of the Alberta chapter of the Canadian Mental Health Association, and yet they continued to diligently move forward, persistently move forward in their agenda to prevent Canadians from having access to this, meanwhile telling them to go back to their doctors and get back on their medications. So, fortunately, those 3,000 Canadians, many of them weren't willing to go away, and neither were we, because it was never about the money. If we had done a risk assessment, we would have said, wow, this is not a good business model to be involved in this type of thing against Health Canada. You know, the regulatory bodies are just, it's too risky. You don't invest into that. But it was never about that. It was about life and death, not only for our family, but for all of those who had come to use these supplements in place of the pharmaceutical medications and get their quality of life back. They required them. And so we didn't go away, neither did the 3,000 Canadians, and so they had to let it back across the border, but then they still came in and they charged us, and what was going to be a 3-day court case became a 3-week court case because of the vast amount of evidence that came forward. Even though they had shut down studies on this side of the border, there was researchers in the US that began to study it, and they found the exact same thing as Dr. Bonnie Kaplan, over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. And that people didn't get side effects from it other than, you know, improved focus, clarity of thought. Their immune system was better. They weren't getting as sick as often. It was improving all areas of the body rather than having these other undesirable side effects like the pharmaceutical medications we're having. So it was proven that our product did what we claimed it was doing. But then Health Canada also took issue with the fact that we were running a program where we were assisting people coming off the pharmaceutical medications where doctors couldn't help them because doctors weren't being taught in school how to take their patients off medications. In fact, they weren't even being told that the medications were addictive. They were being told sometimes by the pharmaceutical industry that they came with a condition called discontinuation syndrome that was mild and transient, instead of saying it for what it was. These are extremely addictive, and sometimes it's going to be like taking somebody off crack cocaine, or even worse sometimes. Sometimes the withdrawal alone is going to result in suicide or homicide. Rather than the pharmaceutical industry being upfront and honest about it, they were trying to shoot under the rug. This is what doctors were being misinformed about. And so we were running a program where we were filling in where doctors weren't able to because they weren't being adequately educated on the matter. And so they took issue with that. But it was substantiated that we were the experts in the field based on the vast amount of people that we had put through our system and assisted in coming off these medications and developed and fine-tuned these programs over the years previous. And so Dr. Charles Popper out of Harvard Medical School actually referred to us as experts in the field. And when and here's an individual who actually co-authored psychiatric textbooks and is responsible for bringing lithium into North America as a treatment for child and adolescent bipolar, he said, when I've got a question about how to take my own personal clientele off of medication, I phone Truehope and I ask them how to do it because they're the experts in the field. He also said that it was far more effective of a treatment than any medication or combination of medications that he's ever studied before. So what came out of it was a court victory, but more so than just a victory, a mandate, wherein the judge stated that we had no choice but to disobey Health Canada. And had we not, and if we were to discontinue supplying these products and programs to those who need them, we could find ourselves in court again, but this time under Section 217 of the Criminal Code of Canada for engaging in criminal negligence by creating bodily harm. because Health Canada demonstrated exactly what would happen when you withdraw it from those who had come to use it. And so what a beautiful thing that came out of this trauma. Health freedom was restored in Canada. It was a court precedent that didn't just benefit us and become a protection for us to move forward, preventing Health Canada from shutting us down, but it was also beneficial for the whole natural health community. And so what came out of it is research started up again. And today there's now 34 medical journal publications on the EMP formulation for the use of autism, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, addictions. Turns out when you're producing adequate levels of dopamine and your reward circuitry is working in the brain, you don't gravitate towards these addictive actions. And so addictions, bipolar is where it all began, depression, psychoses, traumatic brain injury, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, but the thing that applies to every single one of us, stress. They did a study right after the earthquake happened in Christchurch, New Zealand. And what they found is that and it was literally right after, because everything was ready to go for an adult ADHD and depression study. It was ready to go for that study, and the earthquake happened, and so the researchers morphed it into a post-earthquake study to determine how people fared under these circumstances where their lives have literally fallen apart around them, how much better they did when they had adequate levels of nutrition. And so what they found was that those that were on the EMP formulation had far less stress, far less depression, far less anxiety, and that they had a greater determination to move forward. It just empowered them. You see through a different lens. You don't get caught in that rut of life that many times we find ourselves in. You're able to see the light, you're able to see a way out, and you work your way out. That's the way that we're supposed to be, is basically unconquerable, right? To not let ourselves get caught up in the nitty-gritty of life, to be able to rise above it, to rise up to our full potential. And it's amazing how nutrition is a phenomenal tool in allowing us to get there. The choice becomes ultimately ours, but the nutrition gives us the means wherein we can have that choice. Where many times when we're overcome with anxiety and depression, we find ourselves in a place of hopelessness and despair, and we can't really get out of it. It's a hard thing to do unless you empower the body. Now, I've got my own personal story, because we all have our own metaphorical earthquakes. We all have our own traumas. We all have our own issues that result. That's the way life is. These circumstances are actually provided to us for us to grow. It's hard to see it when you're in the middle of it, though. But when you look back, you say, wow, that experience was invaluable. But sometimes it really, really, really sucks. But regardless of the storms that rage around us, we can rise up. And so me and my family began our journey really after the loss of our son in 2012. We began to learn what life was really all about, and that it was really about being able to love, to forgive, to be filled with gratitude. We lost our son. We still don't know what from. There's so much cover-up surrounding it, and part of the reason for it is because if it were uncovered, you would see that the liability doesn't fall on me and my wife, who were charged, and I went to jail, and it was overturned by the Supreme Court of Canada, but actually that it falls in the medical system, wherein they involved themselves in criminal negligence when they didn't adequately supply those ambulances with the proper equipment necessary to get an airway into my son, who all of a sudden required an airway. And they changed the dialogue to make it sound like he got so sick over time and he finally just degraded to the point that he stopped breathing. Wasn't the case. Surprised me and my wife when he went symptom-free for the better part of a day, and all of a sudden he stops breathing at night. We phone an ambulance, he gets into the ambulance, gets to the hospital, and he's brain dead. So the first thing they did is they phoned poison control to see if any of the herbs that we had used would have created brain death. When that didn't work for them, they then came up with this elaborate theory of bacterial meningitis and that he was already dead before he got to the ambulance, which is untrue, because when he came back to life after the ambulance issue, and once they got an airway in him, and they were afraid he was going to pull out his intubation tube, then they proceeded to over-medicate him, and by the time he got to Alberta Children's Hospital, then there was nothing. There was no hope at all. And so me and my wife were charged. And so we go through the most traumatic thing that a parent can go through. I don't think there's anything more traumatic that a parent can go through other than losing a child. I couldn't imagine something greater. And it absolutely devastated us. But then to have that salt ground in every day as you're having to relive this over the next few years, and you actually start to think, like, you know, did I do something wrong? What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? You go through that blame and you beat yourself up, and then you get into the court system, into the courtroom, and you discover that they're lying about it, and that they falsified the autopsy report, and that they withheld evidence, and that they actually destroyed evidence that would have shown a light on what truly happened. And then you finally go through the whole process, and they change the law because this evidence comes out during court. They change the law to force the jury into a position where they had no choice but to find you guilty. And the jury comes out a day and a half into deliberation, and half of them are crying because they don't want to give the deliberation, but they had to. They had no choice. And it goes before the Supreme Court, and then there's a unanimous decision of 7 judges who say, yeah, this is wrong. This is wrong in law. And you come to recognize that there was an agenda there. But throughout all this, what we really learned is not to play the victim. And that's not what the point is here. The point is that we just went through an intense, intense fire. And my natural reaction would have been to close up and to go into a cocoon and just close everybody out, become bitter, cynical. That's our natural tendency. When we go through these hard times, we want to just close up. But that's not what we were made to do. And it was amazing. What we found is 2 things. 1, if we nourished ourselves physically, we had that choice to choose that darkness or to choose the light. We didn't have to find ourselves in that darkness and despair and hopelessness. And we could still be decent human beings throughout all this and forgive those who have trespassed against us, for those who have sought to harm us, for all of the death threats that came in over social media and all the hate messages. We learned to be empathetic to what was going on in their lives that would cause them to do that to others. And we learned to be grateful for our lives, even though most people look at it and say, wow, your life sucks. No, it's filled with abundance. I've got other children. They're incredible. I've got family. I've got friends. I've got an opportunity to share with others. It's amazing. Life is beautiful. The other thing is that it provided a means for us to make the choice to have a connection to the divine, to our Father in heaven, to a loving God. And through those 2 things, spiritual and physical nourishment, we were able to be empowered to go through all this. And that you literally become unconquerable. You can just move forward. But we found that we relied on both of them, and that if we went without any one of those, that the darkness seemed to consume. And so it's amazing how nutrition plays that role. Changes the way you see life. Gives you the opportunity to make those choices. Now moving forward, and we're back in court again, by the way. The Supreme Court said wrong, go back to court. Unfortunately, they don't compensate you for the almost $1 million that's cost you to go through those 3 different stages. And so now we're back at square one, and we're trying to figure out what the next direction is. But we're just surrendering, and we're seeing where we go with it. But it'll be an interesting journey. It'll be a little bit of a hard journey, but I think we're going to continue to grow from it and continue to expose more of the issues as we have a chance to get more evidence, hopefully, if it's not completely destroyed. So, moving forward. Brain research. This is phenomenal in regard to the treatment of concussions, traumatic brain injuries of any sort, and strokes. Now, they actually called it the stroke study because it would have the same function as what a stroke would do when they did these injuries to the rats in the center here in Lethbridge, Alberta. Dr. Brian Kolb did a follow-up study to those 22 vitamins and minerals he initially used. He wanted to use our supplement after he actually used it on his brother-in-law who had an anxiety issue and saw the tremendous results from it. So he took the 36 ingredients from the EMP, put them into Purina rat chow. After he had induced a stroke in these rats by either removing a large portion of the frontal lobe of their brain or by punching holes in the parietal lobes. And so then they did a study to see how they did cognitively, because each of those actions impaired their cognitive function. And what they found without fail is that the rats that were on the EMP formulation is that after 90 days they had a full recovery in their cognitive function, and in fact they were actually outperforming cognitively the control rats that never had a brain injury that weren't on the EMP. So they were actually kind of more normal than normal, if there's such a thing. They then took a look at the brains to see how they had healed physically, and this is what they found. These are the control rats. There's a coloration difference. You can't really see it due to the lighting, but there's a coloration difference there only for identification purposes. Those are the control rats, no brain injury. Here's the one with a large portion of the frontal lobe removed. Without fail, full recovery. They'd never seen that before. what they saw with the parietal lobes, and this actually impaired their cognitive function even more than the removal of the frontal lobe of the brain. There was some healing there. All you see is a scar tissue with the ones that were on the EMP formulation, a full regrowth. They then took a look at the neurons, and an indicator of a healthy and highly functioning neuron is how complexly branched and how long the dendrites are, the things that are sending and receiving messages. So the more of those you have and the longer they are, the better connectivity you have. Without fail, it was like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree versus a regular Christmas tree. Full, longer dendrites, more of them, able to send and receive messages much quicker. Probably allows me to talk a little bit faster. Hopefully you can interpret it as fast as I'm saying it. But anyways, so the importance of these pictures, though, is nothing. As significant as they are, they're completely insignificant. Who here woke up this morning, went down to your bathroom mirror, looked in it and said, wonder what my brain looks like today? Anybody? All right, got one. You are the second. I do this all year. You are the second. We don't care what our brain really looks like. What we do care, though, is how's our brain working? Are we going to be able to get throughout the day? Are we going to be able to function? Are we going to become flustered and become distracted and stressed and overwhelmed? That's really what we care about. So whether or not any of this stuff had even taken place, the most important part of that study was the fact that those rats had had a full recovery in their cognitive function and were actually outperforming their counterparts that never had a brain injury. That's the most important thing. Even if the brain cells never actually even grew back. Doesn't matter. They were performing, they were able to do what they needed to do. Awesome. But this was kind of a bonus validation, being able to actually see it, that it actually did happen, right? That the brain actually responded more so than just making new pathways. It actually produced new matter and was able to function very well. So now those are young rats. We didn't expect to see that that type of effect would take place within the human population, especially with elderly. And we had the opportunity, after Discover magazine published an 8-page article on that study, to actually have people who were in their elderly years, who had strokes and stuff, to see the effect that it had on them. And it's really quite incredible. It surprised us, where people were actually seeing that kind of recovery in their elderly years. Because normally when you're elderly, you're not going up, you're going down, right? So it was amazing to see the kind of regeneration that was happening when you gave them the proper nutrition. Now this article generated a lot of controversy. And unfortunately, because you're probably asking the question, well, hey, this is like groundbreaking research. Why haven't I heard about it? Shortly after this article was published, there was some individuals that we found on our file with Health Canada that had incited the Health Canada attacks on us that are connected to the pharmaceutical industry, and they popped up again, just like they popped up multiple times throughout my case as it's a pharmaceutical case. They popped up again, they attacked the university, and the university didn't know how to handle it, and so they actually never went anywhere with it, even though it was the most exciting research that those researchers had ever performed. And so it's prevented this from moving forward, unfortunately, in the field of treating stroke and traumatic brain injury. But we have had the opportunity to see many people that have had sports injuries and stuff see a dramatic recovery, which is just beautiful. But the article also talked about how people like Joseph with mental illness had a hope. 22 years ago, he had no hope. He had no hope of living a normal, fulfilling, love-filled life because he was just devastated by that mental illness. And there was no answer to help, to provide a recovery. Today, you'd never know that he had mental illness. And he's able to actually have those long-lasting relationships that he would have never been able to maintain before. He met a young woman who had mental health conditions herself. She got off her medications, got well. They both have the lives they never would have had it not been for the adequate nutrition. And they have the same blessing as my parents. A lot of children, except they're a little more proficient at doing it. You can imagine the stress of having a set of twins there, right? Can you imagine the stress of having 2 sets of twins? They do it. They got it. Now, that's not a symptom or a side effect of EMP that we're aware of yet, but it very well could be. No. We do become a lot more effective, a lot more efficient, our bodies do, when we use the EMP. But I don't think it's in regard to procreation, other than ensuring that your body has everything it needs to become fertile. Autumn, you'd never know she'd been mentally ill. She's more vibrant and healthy today than she was 22 years ago. She was given the advice to have an operation to prevent her from becoming pregnant because of the harm that those 5 medications would have on her. She's glad she never took that advice because she got well and had 3 beautiful daughters after, with the same husband that she actually attempted to kill on more than one occasion when she was delusional. So, They have a beautiful life that they never thought they would have had. She went on to write this beautiful book, Promise of Hope, which was available in Chapters and Costco. The audio book is available on audible.com even. We have copies of the book down there, and we do sell them, but we actually like to give them away with a promotion of buying 2 products and you get a free book. Just make sure you have a box of Kleenex handy, because you will laugh and cry, and if you're a strong, tough male like me or whatever, you try to play that role, you'll still break down and cry. It's a good thing. Crying is beautiful. So anyways, beautiful book. But yeah, has the life that she never should have had. So going into the EMP, our desire was to bless humanity, to bless people the way that we've been blessed. And what we found over the years is, even though it's an incredible foundational formula that addresses so many nutrient deficiencies that are prevalent through all of humanity, really, unless you're living up in the mountains, growing your own food, growing with glacial water that's nutrient dense. It's a beautiful foundational formula, but we recognize that sometimes people need more in order to get to where they need to be in life. And when this wasn't delivering fully, we became disheartened. And so we began to look at other solutions and began to incorporate that over the years. And many times we just, say, go down to the health food store, pick up this product or this product or this product, add it to it, and that should work. And sometimes, though, what we found is that there was a void in the marketplace where the health food stores didn't have what we needed the people to get on in order to see those results. So we began to bring on those products onto our own line so that we could make sure that people had access to those products that would be life-changing in conjunction with the EMP. And so I'm going to skip through this. Actually, I'll go through this real quick. So the EMP, the reason why it works is because it's the right combination of ingredients working as a team in the right balance, and it goes through a 4-day proprietary process that we've developed wherein we micronize those minerals and we let them sit there and break down with organic culture so that they're chelated, so that by the time that you get it, it's in the proper form that your body can actually use it, just like you would get it from food, except in the proper amounts, whereas food, unfortunately, is deficient. So that's why it works. What to expect? Well, a whole lot of things. If you're suffering from a nutrient deficiency disorder, it can manifest as just about anything in the body. But improved mood and focus are the main things. Increased immunity, better sleep. Why? Because we're empowering the tyrosine pathway, the tyrosine to convert to 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin, to acetylserotonin, into melatonin. So many times people come to us, they're depressed, and they're also not sleeping. We fix the depression, and all of a sudden they're sleeping. Why? Because it's all part of the same chain. So better sleep. Detoxification, it acts as an oral chelator. Many times people will take it, they start feeling great, and then all of a sudden they go through what we call a healing crisis or a detox crisis, because it pulls some stuff out of the body that's undesirable, but it flushes it out. So if you get that, just go a little bit slower, allow it to be gentle. But being that it wasn't the end-all be-all, even though it's a foundational formula that worked for the vast majority of people, we had to produce other products like the Free Aminos, which is a beautiful amino acid supplement in the same balance as human breast milk, in a form that doesn't require digestion. So it's like taking proteins, a perfect protein basically, but that your body doesn't even have to use enzymes to break down. It just absorbs like that. We've seen how it helps people come off medications, reducing the withdrawal effects substantially, but also how in conjunction with the EMP, it's like an accelerator in healing the body and the brain. So if you've got a mental health condition or mood issue, using the two together is even faster, but if you only use one, the EMP is generally the way to go. We've developed a bone health product because we discovered if people added other minerals like calcium, magnesium and stuff, and they threw off the balance, even though they're taking more, they'd see less results. So we came out with a bone health product that was in the same balance and goes through the same process, so it's just as bioavailable. And what we found is that it doesn't contradict the effects of the EMP. It actually further enhances the effects in regard to the healing of mental health conditions. And you get a beautiful bone health product that has also been shown in many people to help reduce the effects of arthritis because of the boron content of it. We've got inositol, which is a beautiful anti-anxiety, so that rather than people jumping, when they get triggered, even though the EMP corrects anxiety long term, while they're going through that transition phase, they have a trigger, boom, they want to run, they want to, go take an Ativan, and then we're dealing with the Ativan issues and helping them come off that and the side effects. Rather than that, you got inositol, which provides a secondary messenger molecule within the cell so that the cells can adequately respond to the hormones and neurotransmitters as it comes in contact. So now the neurotransmitters and hormones are able to effectively do their job in the body. And what we found with the inositol or what science has found, is that it's even more effective than metformin in the treatment of type 2 diabetes, wherein there's insulin resistance and the cells aren't adequately responding to the insulin, or in the treatment of PCOS. So it's a beautiful product for that, for hormone and neurotransmitter function. The EMP and free aminos help produce the neurotransmitters and hormones. The inositol helps the cells respond. And then we've got the nascent iodine that we're going to talk about real quickly here in regard to hormone health as well, and how it actually activates the hormones, because every single hormone in the body has a receptor site for iodine that, unfortunately, being that we're all deficient in iodine, is being occupied by the overabundance of fluoride, bromide, and chloride, and how those elements are accumulating in the glandular areas of the body as these hormones deposit there, and the hormones aren't really doing their job. So we'll talk about that. We've also got the olive leaf extract for gut health to help knock back candida, which, if somebody's not responding adequately to EMP, generally it's because they're not absorbing it. There's something going on in their gut that needs to be dealt with first. And that's what the olive leaf is there, to be used in conjunction with great probiotics to facilitate the proper digestion and breakdown of your foods and your nutrients. So, going into nascent iodine, talking about thyroid health here, because it's a big one. If you don't have good thyroid health, many times the EMP will help correct that. But if you've got a real severe condition of a thyroid condition where you are it's complete dysfunction, you need a little bit of extra help, and we've seen that. And that's where the extra iodine comes into play. And so we came out with a nascent iodine that's a pre-converted form of iodine, so that even though your thyroid may not be functioning properly, in converting the iodine that comes to it to this form, we can bypass that and already have a form of iodine that's ready to go into the production of T4 and then T3 hormones to facilitate the increased metabolism of every cell in the body, to basically wake everything up and to get everything starting to work well. It helps you detoxify from the fluoride, bromide, and chloride as well. And so it's just a beautiful product. So the reason why we have it converted like that, it's more gentle, because there is concern about different iodine supplementation. It's more gentle, but yet more effective because it's already converted. So the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I put an ounce of water in a little shot glass, and then I put a few drops of that iodine in there. I swish it around. It absorbs in the mouth. It absorbs very, very rapidly. So it's absorbing close to the thyroid. And literally within about 10 minutes, I've got an energy boost. Not like a caffeine energy boost. It's not a stimulant. It just wakes up every cell in the body, because T3 hormones are necessary for the regulation of the metabolic rate of every single cell in the body. And that's why many people will take this. They'll experience more energy. They'll experience weight loss, because their body just turns on the way that it should. So the reason why it works, it's bioavailable because it's pre-converted. That's why it works so well. Now, iodine by itself, like I said, is great, but it's even better when you have the whole team working together. And so the companion nutrients are the magnesium and selenium, to ensure that you're optimizing the iodine pathway, and then vitamin C, B2, and B3. And then also sea salt, ensuring you have adequate levels of that in your diet. And then the iodine is really going to do its job, and you're going to just feel that, feel really, really great. So what to expect? Well, because every single hormone in the body has a receptor site for it that, unfortunately, is being occupied by these other toxic elements. You can expect when you take that and it flushes those other elements out and actually activates those hormones, you're going to have better hormone balance, right? Now, also one thing I failed to mention is that the glandular tissue needs iodine for proper formation. And when you become deficient in iodine, that's when you can end up with cysts in the glands that eventually can become cancerous. So iodine is very, very well known for preventing different glandular cancers like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, because now they're able to develop properly the way that they're supposed to. So not only does it flush those other toxic elements out of that area, it also helps with the proper growth of those areas. So balance hormones and metabolism. Increased IQ. They've done studies where they've shown in areas where people are deficient in iodine, which is generally your inland areas, versus areas that are sufficient, which is generally your coastal areas. When when they've identified that, there's that contrast where these people definitely don't have enough and these people have enough, up to 13.5 points difference in IQ. Now, I don't know about you, but without that 13.5 points, I'm useless. So it's a good thing to have. Detoxification from the fluoride, bromide, chloride, but also things like lead and mercury. It helps detoxify some of the heavy metals, which is a good thing. Get it out of the body. But ultimately what we're looking for is that increased vitality for life. When people take it and they've been severely lacking it, and all of a sudden they have this renewed vigor for life, that's the most beautiful thing, because that's what we were looking to get with the EMP. That's what we were looking to get, and when we couldn't get it, that's why we had to resort to other things to work in conjunction. So that's what it's all about helping us to see life for what it truly is. Not about products, it's about people. It's about blessing lives. It's about allowing us to be able to rise up much closer to our full potential and become the people that we were made to be, because we are here for purpose. We all have a divine purpose. And we shouldn't let these health conditions get in our way. We need to empower the body as a tool to allow us to become who we were meant to be and to do what we were meant to do. And ultimately, to live in love, to live in gratitude, regardless of how sucky life may be, regardless of the storms that may rage around us. We weren't made to be products of our circumstances. We were meant to rise above and to see life as being beautiful and vibrant, because that's what it truly is. Thank you so much. We got 5 minutes. Perfect. 5 minutes for questions. They got a booth to get back to. All right, any questions?
These are all the products are sold in health food stores, or is it limited?
The vast majority of them are sold in health food stores. Almost always the EMP and nascent iodine.
There, but I haven't seen the other ones.
Yeah, sometimes the free aminos are a little bit hit and miss, and sometimes the inositol is a little bit hit and miss. The BMD, well, is a little more hit and miss, and the inositol is a little more hit and miss, unfortunately, in the health food stores. But the main ones are sold in health food stores.
So it's best to order direct from your website?
No, it costs more typically. Yep. Yeah, if you order directly from us through the States. Yeah, one of the models that we wanted to apply was we wanted to make this more affordable and easier access for people, and so that's why we went through the health food stores. Took a much different business model. Obviously, it's far, far, far less profitable for us, but it gets it into the hands of the people, and that's what really matters. Yeah.
Oh, we found it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Did you mention any of the products that have like omega-3s? You mentioned EPA. Is that a part of any of them?
You know what? Because we don't have the technology or the know-how to make an omega fatty acid that's better than what you'd find in the marketplace, we don't want to go there. We don't want to just supply products that are run-of-the-mill, right? Unless we've got the ability or the necessity to provide a product because maybe something else is hit and miss or whatnot, we generally won't put a product out. So unless it stands out above and beyond and is going to be more beneficial for somebody to take it versus taking another product, we won't introduce it. So we haven't introduced an omega fatty acid for that particular reason. So we just recommend you go down to the health food store and get a really great one. Many times they'll recommend that you get something that's pre-converted with the DHA and EPA, because many of them have received training that people are not adequately converting the ALA to the DHA and EPA. And that's correct. Most people aren't. But that's because most people are deficient in magnesium, zinc, and the vitamin B3 and B6. So they can't adequately convert. So feel free to get which one you feel inclined to do so. I use vegetable source ones. Generally, a good omega-369 is what I use. Generally, Udo's oil. Sometimes I'll use a pre-converted one. I think it's Vegelicious, and it's pre-converted, and I'll do that sometimes. But I don't rely on the pre-converted because.
Source from algae. Have you tried that before?
Yes. Yeah, where it's already got the DHA and stuff. Yeah, so sometimes I'll do that, and they taste better, so it's easier to get it into the kids. So that's why we'll a lot of times do that. But in their smoothies, they'll just get the standard 369 from flax source, being the 3. And so we're not concerned about them not converting because they're getting all their other nutrients, so the body will convert what it needs to convert very effectively. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you said one for gut health as well, right?
Yeah, so we got the olive leaf, which basically, if you were to think about the gut as a garden, and unfortunately, within our society, we have put an overemphasis on antibiotic use, to try to just prevent everything. And antibiotics can have a great place, right, in preventing some disease, right, infectious disease. But if you use it and you don't follow up with probiotic supplements, what's going to happen? It's like you just weeded the garden and you just took everything out. Maybe you had a bunch of pea and tomato plants and all this type of stuff, and you just cleared it all out. What's going to fill in if you don't put anything back? The weeds, the opportunistic weeds, and that's the way the gut is. And so if you go and use a bunch of antibiotics and you don't follow up with probiotic treatments to then fill in those voids and to restore that gut flora, what you'll end up with is all the opportunistic pathogens like Candida albicans, which overtake it, and they love nutrition. So you go and take EMP, you may get some of it, but you're also feeding this imbalance. You're feeding the weeds, and they're growing and they're proliferating, and so you need to take care of that. And so the olive leaf knocks a lot of that back safely and effectively, as well as providing some good positive side effects, because it's an incredible antioxidant, over 4 times more powerful than vitamin C, as well as it helps regulate blood pressure. So it's a beautiful herb that doesn't just take care of gut health, but you knock it back with that, and then you bring in a great probiotic to fill in that void. So you're able to clear out some of the weeds and replant the garden. And then you start to see that everything changes. That alone will have a substantial effect in your outlook on life and feeling good. But then now that you put the nutrition in and you're actually getting it rather than feeding these Candida albicans, you're going to feel even better.
Right. And did you anyone in your family make any major dietary changes to at that point where they were kind of like addressing these things?
Not during it. Over time, we've all made dietary changes as we were meant to continue to progress. So it's great to take some of these pills and feel great. But what if you can feel even better? And we've discovered that you can feel even better when you begin to eat cleaner, more organic, getting less environmental toxins into your system, that type of thing. So we've made huge changes and taken a very holistic approach. But what we educate on to try to keep it very simple, not to create too many barriers, is what's the first thing that we can do? Get that nutrition into you so that you can start seeing clearly, you're more motivated, and now you're going to go and do all these other changes, right? That are going to be kind of the icing on the cake, but the getting those minerals in is really the cake. That's what's going to make the biggest difference.